All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Vitalogy podcast. Ryan, we have made it. We're here.
We are.
It's good to see
We're
you.
a few minutes late, but
We're a few minutes late, yeah.
life happens sometimes.
I know. We came in and I was like rushing and getting things. We were getting ready, and I even said it's good to see you.
It is good to see you.
It is.
Too.
Hello. Let me just pause for a minute.
Yes.
Say,
Hi.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah. We hope you're having a great day too.
Yes.
Or that you're surviving, right?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, yes. Yes, it is really, really good to see you out there. And so if you're joining us, as always, we'd love it if you say hi in the comments, whether you're joining us on Facebook or on YouTube. Of course, you can do that if you're live. You can be watching us after the fact on either of those or joining us on podcast. And if you're on the podcast, you're just listening, maybe at double speed.
Maybe at double speed while you're running or doing something around the house.
Yeah.
Or
I'd suggest like 1.75 speed.
1.75
or 1.5.
Yeah. I usually listen to podcasts on 1.5.
Yeah,
There's a few that I listen
good.
to on normal time.
Yes, that's true. Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, just one right now.
Is that right?
It's The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill.
Oh, really?
I'm just so interested in
It's
the
intriguing.
content of it that I'm like, and it's only coming out every other week now.
Yeah.
So I'm going, all right, I don't need to rush through this.
Yeah,
I can sort of take it more slowly.
Yeah.
So I haven't.
All right.
Yeah,
Way to
that's
go.
the only one.
Way to go. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Every now and again when there's music, when they're talking about music,
Yeah.
then I have to slow it down.
Yeah, you have to slow it down.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
now I got to listen. But there's some people that I listen to on a podcast. When I hear them normal, I think to myself, who is this? It sounds nothing
was
like
one
them.
of those somebody you saw this Sunday night?
It is. I didn't notice that actually.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that. Tell us.
So Josh and I and another friend of ours had the chance to go down and see John Mark Comer in downtown San Diego. He had a book release event. So his book, Live No Lies, came out yesterday, I believe. And he did an event talking about the book and sharing the idea behind it and a little bit of the content from the book. So John Mark Comer was a pastor up in Portland. He since has stepped out of the pastorate, but is continuing to do ministry and speak and has more of a national sort of platform right now. So it was great to get the chance to hear him and to hear him on only 1.0 speed.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, it was. It was great. In fact, that I'm sure will have to be a book.
We'll bring that book.
That you bring that book. In fact, we both will at some point. We did talk about bringing another book that, I'll save that conversation for when we talk about a book.
Perfect.
Because we talked about bringing a book together and then we didn't. So it's kind of it's in the hopper. It's in the hopper. We can always
we need
add
to spend more time on that though.
But I do have to just add, if you're joining us, you'll see this on the screen. I just have to add, sup back at you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Greg Hill writes, sup, boys. Now,
What's up, Greg?
I'm just saying, sup back. All right, that's all. All right, good to see you, Greg. Yeah, but as always, we gather around about this time every week to reflect a little bit, to process what's going on. We love being able to process what's going on in the world some. If there's anything especially that is going on that influences us, influences church, things like that. But love talking about the sermon series right now.
Yeah, this has been a fun one.
This really has.
I feel like we say that about all of them, probably, but some are more fun than others.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest.
Okay, now that's a good question. Has there ever been a sermon series
that I got?
Maybe this is a bad question. Maybe this is a question that pastors shouldn't ask pastors live in front of people. But I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Has there been one where you're like, oh, why did I do this? I wish that I could have done this differently.
There are definitely series that I've thought in hindsight, I'd do that differently next time.
Yes.
I'd do that differently next time. So, this is not, have I done any of those at Emmanuel Faith? Yes, I have. Am I going to tell you which ones? No, not right now.
Interesting. I once tried to do a series through the book of Acts, which I loved. And it was like great all the way up to about
chapter 22,
19, 20, somewhere in there. And then it it just like it gets to be a slog after a while.
When Paul gets when he starts to be either imprisoned or on trial, starting in chapter 22, I just felt like, okay, this is really important. This is part of the storyline, and
no doubt
it's hard to preach.
It is hard to preach. You get kind of some repetitive stuff, and it's just not. It's not as preachable.
Yeah,
it's very interesting, very good stuff, but. Like you're saying,
I'm currently planning a message series in the book of 1 Corinthians that's going to last 33 messages.
33 messages.
And so I hope that's not one. If you ask me that question in 2 years, I hope I don't go, yeah, remember when we did 1 Corinthians?
Yes.
Like, that was something else.
I don't think that's going to be the case.
I don't
at all.
I'm excited for it. I can't wait.
It's going to be great. Yeah, that's going to be a deep dive.
It will be.
1 Corinthians.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
Because 1 Corinthians is a big book.
It's a big book.
But
16 chapters.
And I mean, there's some chapters in there that are like super beefy.
Yep. Others that, maybe not quite as much. But yeah, like you have, I would argue, the most complete exposition of resurrection.
Yeah, exactly.
In 1 Corinthians 15, you have in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, you have an extensive conversation about spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
Section 11, you have, or chapter 11, you have arguably one of the most debated passages in the New Testament about, head coverings and wow, I mean, just really, really intense and interesting things. So, you have a whole conversation in chapter 6 and 7 about marriage and sexuality
and singleness.
Like
one of the one of the most important passages.
Yep. So I chose to teach through it because of all the just really I would argue culturally important topics still today. So that's the idea.
That's a good. It's interesting. That's a good mixture of both theological and very practical.
Yes.
Whereas some books, Romans, there's some practical things in there, but it's really kind of known. The first 11 chapters are like dense theology.
Yeah.
And then you get into some practical stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about 1 Corinthians is the theology and the praxis tend to dance with each other a little bit more. And like Ephesians, it's like 1 through chapters 1 through 3 is theology, is all about who is God and then who are we in God. But then you have that, how do you live that out in chapters 4 through 6. 1 Corinthians tends to be a little bit more it dances, right? It's like one right after the other,
which is how it should be. I don't want to say like Romans is wrong about that, but a lot of people will even say that we should read Romans kind of backwards in a sense, like the real purpose of it in a sense, or the reason it was written, I'd say, is because of all the practical things, but all of the theology of it is to kind of support that,
right?
In a sense, and so, and not to say that there's, obviously Romans was done right, but I'm not saying that's not the point. It's a weird thing to say.
What's that album that people said you should listen to backwards? Wasn't there like an ACD album? AC/DC?
Yeah, was it AC/DC or I feel like Led Zeppelin? Yeah, something like that. But
not like that.
Not like that. No. No, not the words backwards, but the ideas that they flow in and understanding them. So, but all that to say is there is a real interplay that theology on itself is not all that useful,
right?
Unless it's lived out and practiced. So I think that's what you're getting at, the interplay between how our theology directs and what we think directs what we do, and vice versa.
Exactly.
That's gonna be cool.
Yep,
that's gonna be great. We got great description of dancing together.
Like that.
I like that a lot. Yeah, that's better than what I said. Good job. Good job. I can admit that. All right. Well, this like you're saying, this series. This is us.
So we are a temple.
Yes.
Was this week, and we use that sort of as a metaphor to talk about being a worshiping community, and so. I feel like I need to apologize though,
Okay.
because
Ladies and gentlemen, here's an apology straight
and
from.
um,
What did you do wrong?
I got home
Oh yeah.
and Kelly says, "Sort of feel like you threw me under the bus 2 weeks in a row," and I'm like, "Really?
Kelly
What
under
do
the
you
bus.
mean?" And she said, "Well, I mean, last week you said people had trauma, or that you were triggering people because you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy
Yes.
of
Oh.
needs." And she said,
I
"This
get it.
this time you brought up the
Yep.
trauma surrounding having to read the Odyssey
Yes.
during high school." And so
Yep.
she said, "I feel like you're picking on English teachers."
Yes.
So
Yes, indeed. So his wife is an English teacher, which that would make complete sense, especially this week, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Maslow, I could see how she.
Yeah, I'm like, come
take
on,
a little
that's-
bit of offense, but
the Odyssey, the
Yes.
Iliad, yeah.
yes.
So anyway, I used that as an illustration early on of the sirens
Yeah.
who are, I said we often think about singing as worship, but really what the sirens are doing is evoking worship. They're calling for
Yeah.
worship. They're pursuing worshipers in a sense. And worship is in another sense crashing your lives on somebody. That's something, surrendering your lives to something. And maybe even you could argue being wrecked for everything else, right? Like you go all in on something, your heart's captured and you're devoted to it. So anyway, that was how I started the message out. But the message was all about the reality that God is seeking worshipers.
Yeah.
And that really, for me, struck a chord with me. And that was that thread that I wanted to pull throughout this whole message to go, gosh, it's amazing, number one, that God is seeking worshipers. He created us with that capacity and that need to be worshipers, and he's longing for us to be worshipers of him. And that's what he designed us for. That's how our lives are most fulfilled. He's glorified in that. I mean, there's a ton of reasons for that.
Yeah. Yeah, as Carolyn says, ouch, they're trying to enslave their worshipers, right?
Right.
The sirens are trying to do that. So I'm kind of glad you didn't carry on that metaphor too far.
I did.
Because that's not the way God's seeking worshipers, right?
Correct. No.
And yeah, and I'm very glad for that. The goal of life is not to just hide ourselves from everything necessarily, and yet at the same time, it was an apt metaphor because it, as she says, God is trying to free his worshipers. Yeah, good job, Carolyn.
Exactly.
He is. He wants them to be free to worship. It's not any kind of forced thing. Although, at the same time, when my experience with this, and I feel like I hear this from a lot of people. Once you've seen the love of God, once you've experienced God's love, it's kind of hard to ever think about not worshiping. You know,
that's what I mean by we're wrecked for everything else.
Yes, I like that. I like that.
Once you taste that,
yeah,
there's a goodness that continues to draw you in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great way to put it.
And then as I started to think about worship in general, it struck me that really worship is ubiquitous in the human experience.
Yes.
It is. Every culture throughout all time has had some form, not just of religious worship, but some form of being captivated. And so I talked about, whether it's, on Wall Street or at the mall or, at a football game, something like that. We are people who are captivated by nature. And so my hope in talking about that was for everybody that was listening to go, okay, if I am a worshiper and if I'm always worshiping, the question I should ask myself is, what am I worshiping?
Yeah.
And what is it yielding in my life? And so that was sort of where I wanted to lead people to at the beginning of our time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I've heard this talked about, like the things that we give our attention to are in some ways the things we worship. Now, let's push back a little bit because, we tend to want to worship everything, but at the same time, we have to give our attention to other things, right? We cannot, live as the proverbial monk. And I don't even think the monks live as the proverbial monks, right? So in other words, like a life that is fully devoted to nothing but worship of God, right? Okay, because they even have to make their beds.
Yeah.
Right. Or they have to like do garden work and things like that. That is giving their attention to something other than God.
Right.
So, what do you? I mean, what do we mean by that? Because there's in a lot of life we're divided people, right? We have to direct our attention in a lot of ways, and yet we don't always say that we're worshiping those things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I would say that. Well, for one, Brother Lawrence wrote his great little book, Practicing the Presence of God. And in it, he talks about sort of living with his feet in two different worlds. So there's what you're doing, but then there's ongoing conversation that can happen with God. And I think he uses the example of doing the dishes, and that even that can be ongoing conversation. So I do think that we live with our attention on two different planes, like what's going on in our physical world right around us, and trying to pray continually in the sense that I think Paul was talking about when he wrote that there's an ongoing dialogue with the divine as we're going about our daily life. So I think that's one way. But I do think that, so the book I talked about last week, You Are What You Love, would say that part of being a temple and part of coming to worship on a Sunday or whenever is really about retraining the gaze of our heart. So there are ways that starts to get sucked, that our worship does start to get taken off track. And so part of our habitus, if you will, is to come back together and to go, okay, Jesus, you have all of me, and I'm bowing in worship at your throne. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to make my bed, although sometimes I don't make my bed. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to go to work. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to do all these other things, but it does mean that you're going to have my heart's devotion as I do those other things.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of, so we don't lead in a traditionally liturgical church, right? But part of the liturgy of the historic church is to guide you into a process of recalibrating your heart's gaze on Jesus. God starts to retrain us, and through worship, we start to become the people that God designed us to become.
Yeah, I like that, because I mean, and I love, back to the Brother Lawrence. If you're training yourself to worship, you can do something like wash the dishes and serve somebody or something like that, and still be worshiping. But it seems like there are things in the world that make it really hard to do.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be like actively sinning and worshiping God at the same time, right? That's like the opposite, in a sense, almost, I guess, of worship. But then there's like even things like, and this is just me talking, like I enjoy going to the movies.
Yeah.
Like there's times when I love it, and I love kind of getting lost in movies. And oftentimes though, even at the end of movies, I'll stop and think about it, and then even try to have a conversation about it. And there's something about that can be worshipful and glorifying to God. But in the middle of that, there's probably not much worship going on. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's one. I think of things like video games. You kind of get lost in them. But something like going out on a walk, taking a hike. I was in a run for this morning outside, and just kind of, thanks, man. Thanks. That's what I needed. There's something about that is an activity where you can worship. It seems like in life, all I'm getting at, there seems to be different things that we can do that are normal things. That can be worshipful, and then some that are harder to be.
Correct.
Worshipful.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
So like having a meal together with people.
Yep.
I think you can.
That's easy.
Be worshipful, right?
Yep.
Because you're dealing with the most holy things,
right?
Well,
and it's easy to give gratitude for those things, and
that. All right, that's good. Okay, well, so that's kind of the setup thing.
Oh, that's a good question.
You want to go there yet, or should we wait?
Sure. Oh, well,
Christy, are you still there? If you're still there, write in the comments. So Christy had a question,
Yes.
and it's a little bit off topic, but we're kind of we can take a break for a second.
Well, I don't know if it is.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, actually, that's a great point. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here's the question. I'm gonna put this on screen, but I'll read it to you as well. Ryan, is it true that you demanded no patriotic songs be sung in our church? And I do think this does relate because we're talking about
Yes.
worship.
We are talking about worship.
Okay, so you demanded.
No.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So actually, Christy wrote a comment card this Sunday. I do my best to respond to every single comment card that is submitted. And so, Christy, I sent you an email on Monday at 1:19. But let me, I can just, can I just read the email?
I think so.
Because I think I did my best to answer in a way that was thoughtful and honest, which is really important to me. So I said, first, a little background on me. I grew up in a Christian family, going to church every Sunday, but never once remember hearing a patriotic song in church. Then at my last pastorate in Colorado, they didn't have a tradition of singing patriotic songs during church services, and never once in 7 years did someone request that we sing one. Now, Carolyn can, I think, vouch for that. She was a part of that church community.
Okay.
So all that to say, the desire for singing patriotic songs during worship services is new and a new and foreign idea to me. To be quite honest, I'm wrestling with this tradition, and I think that is my honest answer to this.
Yeah.
I really wrestle with it, and I'll talk about why in just a moment. I said my personal conviction is that the church is designed to be the family of God that transcends ethnic nationality. I think of passages like 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10 that says, but you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So they're like he's saying that as a Christian, you're a distinctly different nation, which we could talk about a little bit. God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, wonderful light. A chosen people and a holy nation seems to suggest that while churches certainly exist within the context and borders of a nation, their core identity is found as being sons and daughters of God. I'm confident that few who follow Jesus would disagree with that, but in my opinion, that's what makes singing patriotic songs within a church service potentially troublesome. We could subtly place our national identity alongside or even above our baptismal identity. Please note, I have no problem singing these types of songs outside of church services. I said, as I was thinking about the issue, I wanted to be sensitive to my blind spot. So I reached out to 2 military chaplains, both men who've given their vocational careers to serve our country and who have served at Emmanuel Faith. I was a little bit surprised when both of them stated that they were opposed to singing patriotic songs during worship services. One even said that he wouldn't sing patriotic songs in a chapel service on a worship at sea.
Wow. Yeah, that's.
I mean, he was at least
strong.
he was stronger than me in that. He said, and I finished with this by saying, as you know, so here's my answer to your question. So Christy, here's your answer. As you know, EFCC has a long-standing tradition of singing patriotic songs during worship services. I don't have any plans on preventing our choir and orchestra from singing these songs, even though I have a personal conviction about the subject. My personal convictions don't need to be our official church stance. I realize that we are part of a body and we need to try our best to honor one another. In the next few weeks, we'll plan on what we do to acknowledge our veterans during our Veterans Day, as we acknowledge Veterans Day. Here's the interesting part.
Yeah.
Veterans Day happens to be November 11th.
Yeah.
November 14th, we are having our Global Outreach Sunday.
Got it. Which is so that would be the closest Sunday to November 11th.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
So I hope the tension is at least we can acknowledge the tension of having a Lebanese pastor preach and then potentially singing more nationalistic types of songs. Right, where he wouldn't necessarily want to sing along with them. And yet he's the one proclaiming the word.
Yes.
that we're sitting under.
Yes.
So I think that outlines the tension.
That definitely does. That definitely does.
So I said there's definitely a place to thank God for our great country and to honor those who served in our military. Some of those are in my own family, and we will do that as best we can. Hope that answers the question. Please follow up if you have any others. Happy to engage.
Okay. Well,
So-
that's very clear. So it's not necessarily you've got it's not like you have something against those songs as songs.
Correct.
And it doesn't sound to me like you have anything against America.
None. I love. Let me be clear. I love America. I love being part of the United States of America. Like I said, I've had family members that have fought for our country. I've had family members that have lived with me after they've fought for our country, and so have had the chance to see that, not firsthand, but certainly secondhand, and great appreciation and huge value for our veterans. But I just think that any song. Well, here's one of the ways I think about it, Josh. As we think about worship, right? Worship in spirit and truth, which is where the message starts to land. I think any song that we wouldn't sing around the throne in heaven is maybe too small for us to sing as the gathered church.
Yeah. Well, and it's just a great illustration in a sense that if we would feel awkward singing that song with a Lebanese pastor, or inviting that Lebanese pastor to sing a song with us, if all of a sudden we're singing and we kind of look over and think, oh, this doesn't really apply to you, then it's probably not something that the church should be singing, especially in a church like ours that is a large church. It's not like we know exactly who's going to be there every week. Okay. Now, I'd say that would be the case even if we knew it was all Americans that were there, but especially if we're gathered with more, which every week we do. Right. Every week we gather with people that are not Americans, that at some level might feel awkward singing that song, right? Or might at least feel like it's something different. So that in and of itself should lead us to kind of question it.
And like I said, am I going to prevent it? No, I will not. And yet my personal preference would be that we don't. And so that's the every pastor has to deal with that though, right? Like where we have opinions, we have preferences, and we have to go, all right, that's where I stand on this. Does it have to be where everybody stands on this? No, it doesn't. Do I think I can make a fairly strong theological case for not doing it? Yeah, I do. And yet I understand that there are very astute theologians on the other side who would say, Ryan, I think you're missing the boat here. So I'm willing to hold that open-handed and engage the tension.
Yeah. Well, this is partly why it's good to have this conversation in a church. Yeah. So this is where, even bringing that up is leading people to think about something that they've probably never thought about. Like, okay, this is just one of those things. See, I grew up in a church that did this regularly. Okay. That actually sang songs all the time. Had American flags up on the stage. Didn't think a lot of it until quite a bit later when I started, asking why that's there, being a part of ministry and all that stuff. But that was just a part of what we did, and so I didn't ask the question until much later in life, and I've sensed that from a lot of people. When they hear this from you, they think, well, this is just what we do, right? And some of them have even heard that this is what we're supposed to do, and that's a different thing, because I think there's a lot of people who've just grown up and that's what we do. They've never questioned it, and then when you bring it up, they go, that's a good point. Yeah. At least that they respect the point. Well, at least they respect your opinion. And that's okay. About it. Yeah. They might disagree. Yes. But they understand what they're free to do. Yes. Yeah. And so that's where some of this theology, especially in this minutia, in a sense, like the stuff that's not super important, this is what we do in community. Yeah. Right. We're seeking the best way to do this. But ultimately, though, it really does relate to this message, because it has to do with where we direct our attention.
Correct.
Right. And that's where I think each of us have to kind of think about, even a song like that. Are we singing that more out of our deep love, abiding love of Jesus and what he's done for us on the cross? Or are we singing that because we really like this country?
Yeah. And I think that's a fair question, because we like to worship in truth, I would argue, is to worship Jesus and to worship Jesus alone. And I do think that there's potential, not necessarily with this subject, but even just in general, for us to, like we were just talking about, to have our heart's affection and attention diverted in a way that really our corporate worship is designed to invite us back to a center, right? To find our hope fully and totally in Jesus and in his kingdom. I mean, we pray, God, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I would argue that part of worshiping Jesus is reminding ourselves that we're distinctly part of his kingdom. And it means that we don't fit neatly or nicely into any empire of the earth, where we have our feet in two camps always. And I think it's important for us to remember that.
And I think this fits in very well with the biblical theme of God's jealousy, in a sense, right? God is, and you mentioned this, that he wants us to worship him because it's the best thing for us, right? That this is, or at least we talked about that. I'm not sure if that was in the sermon or not, but here's where this is, God is jealous for our worship, ultimately because he knows this is the right thing for us the right way for us to live. When we worship the wrong things, it gets in the way. And all throughout the Bible, there are people who are dabbling in worshiping God, Yahweh, but then they're worshiping other things as well.
Correct.
And that's, God's like, I mean, he's almost like, choose a side, right? I mean, in fact, that's what Joshua says, right? Choose this day who you're going to worship, right? And he doesn't want you in the middle somewhere. It's almost like he's saying, just go ahead and worship them or worship me, but none of this in between stuff.
Right.
And clearly the better option is to worship God and God alone.
Yeah.
And that's what the story of the woman in the well, right? And we haven't really introduced that at the podcast much. And here we are with
40 minutes
maybe 10 more minutes to talk about this.
So Jesus leads us to this woman to this point where they have a conversation about worship, right? And I think I primed the pump last week and said, it starts off with being about water, then about her love life, and then about worship. And I suggested in the message also that this is really, I think, about worship the whole time. I think she's actually more in line. I think her question to Jesus about where to worship is actually way more in line than I originally thought it was. So
I really like that observation, and you kind of got to throw it out there in the message. But it's one of those that I'd love another 10 minutes on.
I would have loved also. Do you want me to go 10 minutes on it now?
I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think what do you want, people?
Well, I just think so. Really, what our thirsts in so many ways drive our worship, right?
Okay, so get that. So because remember, her first question had to do about her literal thirst, right? So she's worried about water, and she's thirsty, and that's why she has to go to the well all the time. That, I think, the context of that changes everything, because we can turn on a tap anytime we want, and there's fresh, beautiful water. Right. But for the vast history of the world, and in those days, and a lot of the world today, dealing with getting water is a good half of your day. At times.
Right? Especially for many women.
Right. So that was what she's dealing with.
And so Jesus wants to talk to her about thirst. And really, he jumps into this conversation and just like, you can see it right now. You step back from it and go, oh, okay, he's like steering this thing the whole time. Will you get me a drink of water? And then you're asking me for a drink. And he goes, well, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. So let's talk about real water. Let's talk about water that will bubble up in you and not run dry. And I think he's talking about a heart that's captivated by God and filled with his spirit. And then he transitions to, he says, he just sets her up the whole time, right? Go call your husband. And she's, I don't have a husband. In fact, I've had 5, and the guy I'm living with now isn't my husband.
Yeah.
And
which
so
is not new information for Jesus.
no,
right?
no,
So he knew this.
totally. He's like, yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So
okay.
he's totally setting her up. I like that's a great observation.
But once again, he's talking about thirsts, and he's talking about a thirst that hasn't been satisfied.
Yeah.
Right. So she water thirst. She has to keep coming back.
Yeah.
She has to keep coming back at noon. Her love thirst. She can't make that. She cannot quench that thirst either. And then she brings up a thirst, I think, that she has, and something that's been sort of that like proverbial pebble in her shoe going, okay, what do we do with this? Where should we worship? And so, like I said, I think all of it, water, love, and temples are all about worship.
Absolutely. Especially if we go back and see that worship is kind of where we draw our attention, where our focus is, where those thirsts are, the things that we're desiring, all that stuff. And there's others than that. I mean, those are, at least for her, I think those are the big ones in a lot of ways for a lot of people. There's our physical needs. There's our desire for love and affection and all that stuff. I'm guessing one of the biggest ones, but you mentioned some others in the message as well. Yeah. That, money and all that stuff that goes with it, power. We can kind of worship all of those things. But ultimately, and I love that, as if he's teeing her up to ask the right question. She does though. So either she's following along.
She does.
Or she, I don't know if at some point she realizes, that thirst he's talking about, he can really fulfill this.
Yeah.
Because here he promised her that she won't go thirsty, and she's still taking that literally, right? Yeah. She's still kind of like, I really don't want to deal with coming to the well all the time, right?
Yeah, please.
And then I think she might be realizing that, she's not fulfilled in this other thirst.
Right.
And then she goes to the ultimate.
Yeah.
So that's what tees him up. So now,
so we talked about worship in spirit, which I said is genuine encounter with the living God rather than just rote ritual or rote religion. Yeah. And I would just point back to John 3, the born again through the Spirit. The Spirit lives inside of the believer, and therefore worship is a response to the living God who lives in us, rather than just going through the motions of religion. And then worship in truth, I would say, is ultimately worship of Jesus and Jesus alone, as we bow it at his throne. So that would be, that's sort of the general, that's the type of worshiper that the Father is seeking after.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then this idea was one that was really interesting to me, because it struck me this week. I said, what happens when we worship the Creator God? I said, well, we become more like him. And so what happened when we worship idols, we become like those idols, right? So, and that's Psalm 115. It's Jonah chapter 2, verse 8. It's, that's an idea within the scriptures. So I'm saying the opposite of it's true also. That if you worship an idol and become like an idol, when you worship God, you should become more like God.
Yes.
And I said, and if God created us in his image, we also become more like ourselves.
Yes. More like what you're supposed to be.
Correct. Like who God designed us to be is actually more and more released and comes more and more out of our life. We to use maybe some psychological terms, like that false self starts to fade away. The true self comes more front and center as we worship. If we become like what we worship, and we worship God, and we were created in his image, we become more and more who we were created to be as we worship the Creator God.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd never put all that together before.
Yeah.
And so I personally had some fun just thinking through that this week, going, all right, Lord, man, worship actually puts you in your rightful place, but it also helps me better identify who you've made me to be.
That's really cool. And I'm guessing that came up a little bit later in the study.
Way later.
And I know this because I'm guessing this because you had one of the points that you put up on a screen was not in the notes.
Right.
And I wrote it down. I love this. It said, and I'm looking at my phone here that's where I wrote it, but what we worship determines the course of your life.
Yeah.
And so that's this idea you're getting at, that the things that we worship, we become more like those things.
Yes.
Right. That's the direction we go. And I started thinking about that if we worship the right things, we start living the right way.
Yeah.
Right. We start living the way of those things. Right. And this is what living in the way of Jesus is supposed to be like.
Right.
We worship Jesus and we start living in Jesus's way more.
Yeah.
And that's us living out Jesus's way.
Totally.
Right? This is why the little nuances that I really like about the difference between living like Jesus and living in the way of Jesus. Okay. It's living like Jesus. Sometimes some people I've heard people even say this and practice this. They've like grown a beard.
Oh yeah.
And like done the things that Jesus did. What was the guy's name that did that? Anyway. Yes.
Year of
living Jesus.
Living biblically.
Biblically, yeah. Where you have to do the actual things that Jesus did. But we have to stop and realize that Jesus, if he were living now, would not be doing those exact things.
Right.
Right. He probably wouldn't have gone out and yelled at fishermen. Because you can't yell, fishermen are so far away these days, right? I mean, it's just a different thing, right?
Yep.
And so it's living in his way with his heart is what.
Yes. Dallas Willard used to say, the question isn't what would Jesus do? That's not the right question necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of bracelets that have sold really well, but he goes, it's not a bad question. It's probably not the best question. A better question would be, what would Jesus do if he were me?
Yes.
So with my experiences, in my circumstances, what would Jesus do if he were me?
Yes.
He said that's a better question.
Yes. I remember I once did a talk on that on WWJD, and I changed it and added all the what would Jesus do if he were me in this time and all these letters, right?
It's a necklace instead of a bracelet.
Totally was. I was like, it doesn't sell as well, you know. WWJD.
That's awesome.
Works as long as you think of it that way. That's
love that. That's funny.
That's really cool.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, well, that I love it. I love it. I think that's a great way to think about worship and a great thing to think about the church. This is us.
Yeah.
This is what we're about.
Yep.
And when we come together, each of us individually worshiping more and more as we were created to be, we actually start filling in the church.
Yes.
A lot more into into where we're going to be going over the next few weeks, right?
Right.
Because this is us.
This is us.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so give me a minute.
I do.
I'm gonna just introduce our next segment, which I'm very prepared for. Ladies and gentlemen, today Ryan brought a book.
I did. And it's a book that was that I've been thinking a lot about over these last few days as I'm getting ready to preach this weekend.
Okay.
So
this is going to inform.
This will inform a little bit.
This is like a teaser also.
It's a teaser.
Okay, I like it.
Okay, so here's the book. The book is called A Gentle Answer by Scott Sauls. Okay. Scott Sauls is a pastor, I believe, in Nashville, somewhere in Tennessee. And he used to work really closely with Tim Keller at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. And Scott is brilliant. He's winsome. And he wrote this book that I think was in a sense, a prophetic piece for us. So he wrote it before any of the just political unrest. We've always had political unrest, but as that was elevated in the last few years, it was published before that and written before that. And I think it definitely just has a good word for our current moment. So I'm talking about what it means to be family on Sunday. So we are family. That's what we're going to be talking about. We are a family. And I think there's some really helpful things in this book. Because one of the things I'm going to say is that in a world that is one columnist said that our world is more divided politically now, our nation, more divided politically now than it has been since the Civil War. And one of my great laments is I see that bleeding over into the church, right? Like in the last year, we've seen people, not just at our church, but at a number of different churches all around, right? That people have started to choose a church based on their political platform rather than their theological convictions. Like I have friends that are really conservative, which is great and fine, right? But they left the church that they were at to go to a church that took a very strong political stance. And I'm going, you don't agree with their theology. Like I know you. And anyway, so I'm not going to give any more details than that, but so they're going, well, I would rather agree with the church's political stand than with their theological stance. And I'm going, oh wow, we're in a different type of an arena here than what the church has been in the past. I mean, I guess you could say that some people have gone to churches that are more, social gospel because of their political stance. That's always been a thing or has been for the last few decades. But it just feels fresh and new and different.
It does, and it feels more dangerous than what people often choose churches for. Because let's face it, a lot of people choose churches, I'm going to say, for the wrong reason, or for reasons that are less than the greatest reason, right? So a lot of people aren't choosing a church because they're looking at all the doctrinal statements and they're saying which one is, the most, accurate, which one loves Jesus most, all that. Sometimes they choose a church based on things like worship style, okay, which, is not a terrible reason. It's not the worst of the reasons, but it's not really the greatest.
Yeah.
There's some people that have chosen churches for all sorts of things. There's some churches that have broken away from other churches for the most petty of things. But this one, especially in line with our discussion about worship, it just seems like it's affiliation with something that doesn't even touch on the Bible, right? Doesn't even touch on who Jesus is. Doesn't even touch with worship, because at least like a worship style, it is something to do with with our main focus, right? It's a distinct, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that I understand, at least. This one is a very hard one. In fact, one of the things that I think we need is actually the difference.
So that's where I'm going on Sunday, at least in part. And can I read, as we have a few more minutes, just one section. So this is in a chapter called "We Grow Thicker Skin."
Yeah.
And all right, so just a quick spoiler alert. I'm going to talk on Sunday about how and I'll include me in this, we have a tendency to get offended easy. And they did a study a while back that said that 81% of people feel like people get offended too easy.
80% of people
81% think people get offended too easily. And so
they all think other people get offended too easy.
So okay, so here's what I wrote, Josh. Yeah, you're picking up where I'm going with this. Okay, so I cited this research poll that they did, and I said, I tend to agree, but isn't it interesting that these same 81% must be some of the people who are getting offended?
Yes.
I think it illustrates the reality that when we get offended, we think we're justified.
Yeah.
When someone else gets offended, we think they should get over it.
Yeah. Oh.
So let's just start with us. What if we moved from being offended to being curious?
Ooh. Ooh. And I hope that makes you curious
There you go.
to come to the message this
That's what you
week.
did All right. So this is page 92, and Saul writes this. He says, "It is because we have been treated with such kindness, such grace, such gentleness, that we ought to be the most difficult people in the world to offend. Christ chose us to turn God's justifiable wrath from us by absorbing that wrath himself through substitution, sacrifice, and forgiveness. His radical forgiveness was bought with persecution, blood, and martyrdom. It is Christ's unmerited love for us that serves as the basis, not only for becoming the best kind of friends, but also the best kinds of enemies the world will ever know."
The best kind of enemy. Wow. Oh, that's a cool way to put it.
Isn't that awesome?
What if, man, what if you were known as the best kind
The
of
best
enemy?
kind of enemy. Anyway.
That's interesting. And part of me says I'd rather not be known as anyone's enemy. And yet, if I'm going to be, let's be the best kind.
Let's be the best kind.
of enemy. That's really, really cool.
Anyway, so
Oh man. Well, Greg, back at us. First comment and last comment, Greg.
all right,
Way to go,
I like
man.
it. Bookends.
He brings up Justin Giboney. And if I could, just this guy. You want to look up somebody worth looking into, especially as you think of politics and all this stuff. Justin Giboney is a great one. He has some great thoughts on that. You're right. As Greg says that he has some good thoughts on politics, theology, idea. He does. There's a group called the AND Campaign that he started up, and
yeah,
it's actually something that that I'm a part of here, getting things going, and some really, really neat stuff. In fact, we'll have to talk about this at a future episode, but we're doing a panel discussion on race in the church.
Okay. Wow.
At North Coast Calvary. It's going to be really cool.
Is it coming up?
In fact, that's coming up October 21st.
Okay.
It's going to be really good. In fact, I don't know if I should throw them, but well, looks like somebody from our own congregation will be one of the panelists. I'll be involved in the kind of other side of it, but
All right. Can't wait.
pretty cool.
Can't
All right.
wait.
We'll
Good stuff.
I'll wait until we have final confirmation. But anyway, everybody, thank you. Ryan, thank you so much. Thanks for diving in a little bit. I know we kind of went into some areas of the message that that you didn't get to talk about. So that just means if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I got pieces of it, then go back and listen to the whole message.
Yeah.
Because it was a solid message that is helpful for any church, but it's been super clarifying for us.
And to bring it back full circle, feel free to listen to it on 1.5 times or 2 even if you need to.
Well done. Yeah. And you're probably listening to this at the same speed, so it'll sound just the same.
It'll sound normal.
Right? It'll sound fine. All right, everybody. Well, so fun doing this with you, and thank you so much for joining us. May God bless you and keep you.
Yeah, thank you guys. God bless.